Good morning, good afternoon, good evening for those that are joining us virtually. I'm sure everyone's gotten a lot out of the last session, and I'm here today to talk about charting the data universe, navigating with knowledge graphs assisted by AI. I first want to thank Amelia and team for an amazing venue here. This is my first in-person event with data science, and I'm excited to be here and looking forward to the conversations ahead. So let's dive right into it. The promise of AI. Welcome to Generation AI. I know we like to talk about Generation X, Gen Y, Gen Z, but we are Generation AI. At the beginning of the year, ChatGPT captured and fueled our imagination in ways that we wouldn't have either thought about 2 years ago. And of course, since then, GPT-4, Wall-E, Llama 2 have created the ability to generate novel content like text, images, videos, audios, and even programming, right? Being able to generate source code. And now we can't even open an email or even look at articles where there isn't a mention of Gen AI. Now, just indulge me here. A show of hands. Who here has read up on either Gen AI or large language models as part of their research? Okay. How many of you have actually used Gen AI already for your own personal use? Fair amount. How many of you are actually contemplating use inside of your own organizations or already using it today? Wow. And this, and just for those that were not able to see it, a good majority of you. Now, this is also backed up by research done by McKinsey, who talked about at least 60 large enterprise organizations. And what they found is that a third of organizations are already using Gen AI in at least one business function, which loosely translates to about 60% of all AI adoption is now Gen AI based. Now that's amazing, that's interesting in its own, but what's also interesting is it's not just one business function that we can probably imagine generating content. We see use in sales and marketing, we see use of it in product and R&D, and we see it in terms of operations, whether it's your customer care operations, whether it's your supply chain operations. And the value is tremendous, right? So everything from automation, taking manual, repetitive tasks and automating those for better efficiency and productivity. We also see this in terms of content generation in marketing, right? Everything from social media posts to blogs, to articles, to website content. And, also in terms of our own everyday creative use and aspects, things like we would do with Google Workspace and Duet AI. In fact, when I started thinking about this presentation, I used Beautiful.ai. I don't know if anyone's used that. It's a way to generate content. It's based on sort of the topics you're interested in, and it actually creates slides for you. Now, what's also interesting is that McKinsey's same study found that the total economic impact of Gen AI loosely translates to about $13 trillion in total GDP that will be added by the year 2030. This is also backed by Gartner and their research with their member companies, where they believe by 2025, 80% of all business applications, things like productivity software, instant messaging software, business intelligence tools will have some form of embedded virtual assistant that will do things like generate content or fetch content type of tasks. And of course, the power and the economic potential is huge, but it's also incomplete. The tools, the technologies, the processes that we need in order to make this a reality inside of large organizations is just not there. And for those companies that can afford it, i.e. my previous presenter, those are huge costs to consider. But even when, and not if, even when these tools, these technologies, these processes find their way inside the enterprise, I guess the real question is, are the organizations ready to unlock the potential of this AI? I posit that those companies that are actually putting the time, or have put the time in building the foundation of making data accessible and shareable, are the ones that are most likely going to unlock that potential for their organizations. And for the rest of them, of course, this is a prerequisite. This is an imperative foundation that needs to be in place before you can unlock that potential. We are swimming in a vast sea of data, and that means a boundless, huge network of information that's structured, unstructured, sitting across data silos, and always evolving and changing. And so, I guess the question is, how do you deal with this diversity of data, this heterogeneity in the data, this location of data that is now in today's world in a hybrid multi-cloud environment, making it even more challenging? Sure, a lot of companies have made investments to centralize things into a data lake somewhere, but at best, you've managed to co-locate a lot of data. What happens when you strip the data from the system of records? You essentially lose context, because those systems of records are designed with business processes in mind, and when you take the data out of those system of records, you lose complete context about that data, which means it's harder to understand its meaning, why it was generated, and what context it was generated. And sure, yes, you got data co-located, and you can probably build an assistant that goes and looks at the data inside of a data lake, but that's okay if you're trying to ask sort of general topics, questions around general topics, where it's okay to get things right sometimes. But being right sometimes just does not work when we are talking about mission-critical data, sensitive data, personal information. And when we think about the challenges of understanding data and applying that to Gen AI types of applications, we find that those challenges are driven by these three aspects. Data that we need to train the models is operating off of incomplete understanding, because we have data that's siloed across the organization. It's also inaccurate because the data that we have trained these models on don't have context, are meaningless, and at the same time, perhaps not accurate because data has changed since the last time you used data to actually train the model. And more importantly, and again, Atul mentioned this as part of Morgan Stanley's use case, is it a black box? And if so, can we trust that data? Responsible AI practices need to understand the ethical implications of that data. And we can only do that if we trust the data and we can verify that data is actually coming from the right sources and has a complete contextual understanding of all information to consider before a response is put together. Because what we do want to avoid inside large enterprises, which for our personal use, it's okay, but inside of these enterprises, when we're dealing with mission-critical data, sensitive data, we cannot have the hallucination problem. And that is an important aspect for us to understand as we embark on this journey for our own purposes in our own organizations. So getting it right sometimes will not work. It does not work for regulated industries like banking, as you heard Atul, and it definitely does not work for any industry, for that matter, that uses personal verifiable information. So, from my perspective, being the head of product at Stardog, we believe the answer is where knowledge graphs begin to intersect with large language models. So, from my perspective, large knowledge graphs provide this compass that we need across this data universe. Knowledge graphs are important. Why? Because they provide structure and connections that help us make sense of the data. Think about it. What at the core, this is representing your institutional knowledge, where we understand the various concepts, the relationships between those concepts, and the properties that describe those concepts that are meaningful to us as an organization. We talk about things, right? We talk about concepts like suppliers and customers, orders, parts, compounds. What we don't talk about are strings in a database. And so representing knowledge in much the same way is what knowledge graphs have a unique ability to do. As we look to train models on our enterprise data, knowledge graphs help us establish that enterprise data vocabulary. Now this, again, from my perspective, this is how we bring this connected network of information together in not only answering the what, but also the how and the why. And knowledge graphs are not unique. They are not new. They are probably likely already in place within your enterprise. If you are a large pharmaceutical company or even a pharmaceutical of any size, your application of knowledge graphs find homes in use cases like drug discovery, drug repurposing. If you are a financial services company, you'll find the use of knowledge graph technologies in the areas of operational risk or customer 360. If you are a manufacturer, you'll probably find the use of knowledge graphs in being able to generate the digital twin of all your manufacturing operations, including things like supply chain traceability and visibility. So, with that, we also understand that knowledge graphs are also fundamental to the modern data architectures of today. For those that are embarking on projects like data fabric or data mesh, knowledge graphs are ways to organize information and manage information and make data fair. And what does that mean? Making data fair. Making it findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this is backed by Gartner as well. Gartner talks about this concept of a data fabric approach that uses knowledge graph, a highly emergent, composable, dynamic knowledge graph to help understand everything that is happening with your data. And this core fundamental piece of technology as part of your modern data architecture is how you want to organize and manage information. And when we look at this from a pure standalone point of view, in terms of its value to your organization, enterprise knowledge graphs help capture institutional knowledge. They do so by mapping your entire data landscape and the metadata that sits inside of your enterprise. So think of it as a metadata knowledge graph. They capture institutional knowledge by modeling information in the ways you want information to be consumed within your set of use cases as a set of business concepts, ontologies, if that's a term you're familiar with. And more importantly, it's abstracted away from where data is actually stored or how data is structured. Right? So this abstraction of data models away from where the underlying data is stored allows you to put multiple lenses on the same data. And further, it captures institutional knowledge by annotating those models with domain-specific business rules. And that is value that you can take and bring when you are integrating this, and we'll talk about this in terms of value to large language models. Knowledge graphs also help in ways where you don't have to fundamentally move and copy and centralize all of your data. We know the flaws with some of that approach. We know there's good reasons to do that. But when we're trying to respond to a question from the business or from your consumers, we want access to the most up-to-date information. And that's where enterprise knowledge graphs have a unique ability to connect and map to data and federate access over that information. What does that mean? That means I want limited amount of physical copy and movement of data. I want to limit the amount of data sprawl. I don't want to have to worry about data security challenges. And more importantly, I want to have access to the most up-to-date real-time information at the time the question is getting generated. And the third benefit data enterprise knowledge graphs bring is this notion of citizen users who can help themselves. And we understand in this era of data democratization and the power of Gen AI to democratize data to more users, making this available to users who don't come with any special skills and can be self-sufficient and can ask questions in terms of concepts that they understand and is meaningful to them, and can freely query, visualize, explore information beyond the initial set of questions without having to learn a new technology or maybe even utilize it inside of their own applications that they're comfortable with, is a key tenet and value that enterprise knowledge graphs deliver. Now, where the magic happens is when the two come together. Right? If you think about where Gen AI brings these challenges of hallucinations, we, with knowledge graphs, have now the ability to eliminate those hallucinations because we're now bringing connected data that allows us to answer the question completely and with information that's up to date in real time. We have the ability to present this context to make more of the retrieval augmented generation intelligent, so that when we embed this into the foundational models, we're able to get answers that are much more accurate from a factual accuracy standpoint. We're able to use this to fine-tune and train the models based on the domain that is of interest. And then, more importantly, the ability for us to ensure that when we look at this data, that we can trust it, it's verifiable, and we bring this notion of explainability as part of the combined value of the two areas. So combined with the fact that we now have Gen AI and knowledge graphs, we have the tools to navigate, explore, and unlock the full potential of AI. Sorry. And at the end of the day, what is that value, right? What we are aiming to do is democratize data for the masses. And I'm sure you've heard this right now, and in the last many months, English is the new programming language. Now that's great. Gen AI has, large language models has the corpus for it to understand language and language context, and combined with knowledge graphs that brings that understanding of your enterprise data vocabulary, you're now able to hone in and take advantage of the natural language aspects of the Gen AI and combine that with factual accuracy, complete understanding, up-to-date understanding that you can bring with full context and explainability to ultimately drive improved productivity, faster innovation, and reduce costs. And it's important that these two technologies continue to evolve and be brought together. And if these foundations in place, I believe that enterprises will be in a better position to accelerate their adoption and use of Gen AI applications, and not only in the coming months, but in the coming years as well, and unlock its true potential for your organization as well. So again, I want to make sure you understand, from my perspective, it's understanding the universe of data is important, but ultimately knowledge is power, and knowledge graphs have this unique ability at their core to represent enterprise data as a knowledge base that allows you to augment information coming back from your large language models and from your Gen AI applications. I want to thank you today for listening, and I appreciate the dialogue, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk more and better understand your challenges, and I look forward to obviously connecting and meeting with everyone. Thank you.